everyone, it's Allison here, also known as Lasan Faye, and today I'm here with another video for my pet project that I refer to as my back to school special. In this video, I'm going to talk about some spread ideas for some of the main things that I think will be helpful to students no matter what level you're at. There's a couple caveats there because obviously there's some things that are useful to high schoolers and undergrads that aren't necessarily useful to grad students. And there are some things that are useful to you later on in education, but not so useful early on. But I wanted to touch on a little bit of everything and kind of give all of you students an idea of where to start with your bullet journal spreads for the upcoming school year. So first of all, there's a couple of spreads I think that are going to be useful to majority of students. And these spreads are a schedule, an assignment tracker, a project tracker, if you need it, a grade tracker, a spread for your extracurriculars, a future log, a holiday or absence tracker, and a spread for your work, study, play plan, and I'll explain what I mean by that later. So where I'm going to start is actually with future logs. And for me, a lot of these spreads I actually can combine down into one spread, but you can obviously extend them out as much as you need to. So to give you an idea about where I started, so this is my first bullet journal here. So where I started with my future logs, my first future log and my second future log were the same for the school year. Pretty much I took the day that I had, or the term that I had, not the day, the term, and I divided the whole thing down into 10 sections. And that's because I'm on a quarter system. I have 10 weeks per quarter. And it was easy for me to be like, okay, week 1, what do I have? Week 2, what do I have? Week 3, week 4, week 5, so on and so forth. So that way I could see where everything overlapped. This was a very useful future log for me because it put everything in one place. However, obviously you can see it got a little bit messy. Some things got moved around. It was difficult to actually see what day things actually happened on. And so I wound up changing this system. And so the second future log style that I went for, this actually isn't for a school term, this is for a summer. And my summer break, which I had a lot of stuff going on then, was 14 weeks long. So I divided up the pages, and so that way I could fit 7 weeks per page. And then I gave myself little boxes, little 3x3 boxes for each day of the week in a given week, and then 2 lines underneath that for just things I needed to do that week. But then within these 3x3 boxes, I kind of followed a bit of a Calendex system, which you should go check out some of the articles on, I believe it's Eddie Hope's Calendex. But that is actually like one of my favorite ways to handle my future planning. But this was a nice thing to do. However, I do find this spread a little labor intensive. I think that's the phrase I'm going to use here. So it is nice. It does keep everything organized, but it was hard for me to check off tasks that I had done and really that was okay for this summer break because I didn't have so much to do. But in the future, like, I knew this wasn't going to work out for me. So where I went from here was my next round of future planning. So overall event tracking, I just use a Calendex system at the beginning of whenever my bullet journal starts, and this contains everything from like school stuff to vacation to just events in general. But I know that's not always like useful in terms of the school year. But I'll do some more on that later when I show you one of my experimental spreads that I have made specifically for these videos. And then tracking during the school year, I started using the Alistair method. Again, I have about 10 weeks per term. Fall term, because the school decided to introduce a new holiday, we had to start earlier. Yes, we get an extra day off in the middle of term, and so they had to add on 2 to 3 days at the beginning of term, like you do. And I also decided to include my finals week for any finals I had to take. And I started using the Alistair method, which I actually really like this. This is what I currently use for my future planning. But it's kind of hard sometimes to see where these dots line up, which wasn't that fun. And then next time I redid it, I decided to use marker and highlight where the lines were before I drew in the black heavy lines that destroyed my ability to see where the dots were. And that was helpful. And I continue to do that today in my current bullet journal. With this past term that I just finished up recently, like about 2 weeks ago. So all of this lined up, and this was much easier for me to deal with. Now then, I do want to point out that with where I'm at in grad school, this not only works as my future log for the term, this also functions as my assignment tracker, which I know isn't very practical for a lot of you, especially if you have a lot of assignments. So I wanted to mention a few other future log spreads, or spread ideas anyway, that you could do or consider doing for yourself. So let me open this up here. So I drew this 2 different ways. One way is like this. So this is inspired by the Calendex system. And this version fits, 16 weeks, which I think that's usually the most that I've seen a term go. And the idea with it is that the way it's divided off, the first column is for inputting the dates, and so you can actually have the dates match where you're at in term. And then the next couple of columns, the next 3, I dedicated to events that happen. And by events, I mean concerts or major study sessions, doctor's appointments, things that aren't necessarily class related, but could be class related, but they take place outside of the class time frame. And then this next column is for homework, and I'll talk about filling that in here in just a moment. And then the third column is for tests. So, and similarly, I also flipped the layout. This version does 15 weeks, though you could probably fit in more. But I included an extra row, and that row is for quizzes. So instead of a test, say you have a quiz, but depending upon personal preference, you might just prefer to have all of that together. So that's what I mean when I talk about future logs. So the other thing, the first item I mentioned also in spreads that I would include is a schedule. Like just your everyday run-of-the-mill schedule, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Include Saturday and Sunday if you have school on those days or class-related things on those days. If you have block scheduling, create columns for that and don't rely on the usual Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so on and so forth kind of setup. And because most classes generally don't go past 5 p.m., one of the other things I suggest is at the bottom of that schedule page, list out any school mandated holidays. So days from the school that you know you do not have class. So they're already written out. You can go ahead, mark them on your future log, and then you know you don't have class that day. So that is what I suggest there. Okay, so some other things that are useful and that I keep referencing to are assignment logs. And with that, I suggest something along these lines. You do not have to do something exactly like this. You could do more like what I have with my combination future log assignment tracker. However, I know some of you have a ton of assignments. I know when I was in high school, I had a ton of assignments for every single class, and I had homework due almost every single day. Whereas the later I got in my educational career, the more time I had for each assignment, but I also had fewer assignments. So I know something like this can be really, really helpful. And one way I would suggest doing this is when you fill it out, let's say, oh, I don't know, you have your first homework assignment. So you could come in, say homework 1. If there's a specific title on the homework, you could write that in. Right when it's due. So I don't know, let's say on September 10th, if term is starting around Labor Day. And then this number here, it does not have to be an included column that you make, but it's to make some other things easier to connect all your spreads. That's the word I'm looking for. So like I would also number your assignments, and then once you complete it, you could check it off as done. Alright, so if say you're in the middle of term, one of the other things that I highly recommend is use a different color for each class. What you can do is once you've written your homework in, you can go over to your future log, and in the homework column, you can just put a little dot on the date the homework's due. So since this is a Sunday, it's probably an online homework, but I was just writing down a random date for the example. Whereas I would use information from the syllabus to mark different test days as well in a similar fashion. Apologies there, I almost had to sneeze. And so then once I finish the homework, I could come in, check it off here, and then I know it's done. So other useful things, because sometimes not all homework assignments are just kind of one-off things. They can be longer projects or papers, and in that case, you're going to want a larger project spread. And what I suggest containing within your project spread, this is a very basic outline of one. I suggest you include things like the name of the project, what class it's for, deadlines, any group members you have to work with. If you have a group, what are the meeting times? What are the tasks that you have to do for the project? And any notes that you need to make. And here, in regards to the deadlines, one thing I recommend you do is do both hard as well as soft deadlines. And what I mean by that is hard deadlines are ones that are put in place by the teacher. So, for example, a teacher might say, okay, this is finally due, I don't know, sometime in November. So if this were a paper, say, for example, final paper could be due, let's actually do a reasonable date, November 3rd. Well, November 3rd, it's a good chunk of the way out. But instead, I could also keep in mind things for myself, like a rough draft, or an outline, and any research I have to do. And yes, sometimes I do build backwards with the list of tasks I need to do. And to reasonably pace myself through this, I could say, all right, I want to get my research done by 10/3, so October 3rd, to give me a month to actually work on this paper. And then the outline, we could say, let's give myself 2 weeks for that, so 10/17, and then another 2 weeks for that, or 1 week for that rough draft to put me at 10/24. And then from the rough draft, editing for the final paper. And like once I had all of these deadlines in place, I would actually transfer these over to the assignment tracker to be like project research. Or my outline. Rough draft. And then finally the final paper. And I would go ahead and include all of those due dates, even the soft ones that I set for myself, into this assignment spread. So that's all set out for me. But this allows me to collapse it all into one thing, even though most of the information for this project is elsewhere. I've now written it within the assignments that I have, and I could also mark these deadlines on my future log, as I would any other assignment I put on here. However, because only one of these will actually be receiving a grade, I'm only going to number the second one, or the final paper, because the rest of them are soft deadlines I made for myself. But again, I could check them off as done as need be. But that's how I would incorporate something like a project tracker along with the assignment tracker. So then another thing to get into is grade tracking. Where I'm at in my educational career, I don't care about my grades anymore. A lot of you who are in high school, who are looking into going to college and want to be graduating well in the top end of your class, you probably care about your grades. Or if you're an undergrad and you're trying to maintain a scholarship, you probably really care about your grades. And so, or you could be a perfectionist overachiever and really care about your grades. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of people who really do care about their grades. And there's a lot of ways that you could incorporate that. You could go ahead and write down your grades on the assignment tracker. Just make a final column off on the right-hand side for grades. Another option is to make a tracker that will just compile everything into one, so all of your classes. And so you can list out your classes along here. I only had the one class as the example. And then for each assignment, if you recall in the assignment tracker, I numbered the assignments. I can have those numbers correspond to numbers that are going across in the grade tracker, so I can input a lot of grades. And all the information is then right there in front of me on one page. So that's something to keep in mind as an option for things you can do in ways of grade tracking. But at the same time, do not feel obligated to keep your grades written down in a bullet journal or in your planner. I never did, and you know, I did pretty well in school, I must say. Another thing is, even if you are recording your grades, hang on to any graded papers that you have returned to you, at the very least for the rest of that grading period, because mistakes happen. I'm now working both as a student and as a teaching assistant, and gosh, I can't tell you how many times things get typoed or just something forgot to get written down, and so next thing you know, your grade that the professor or teacher has for you does not match what you have for yourself. So hanging on to the original graded work is very useful. All right. So other important things to keep track of, especially if you're a college student, is any syllabus info. I know certain high school students will probably need this information as well. And pretty much what you want to do, you just want to list your class, who your professor is, what their office hours are, and any major exams or projects and the dates that those occur on. And I also highly recommend that you take those dates and you record them also in your future log. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can be this simple. Maybe also if you're doing color coding, which I do highly recommend, or if you can't do color coding, number your classes instead. But just list it out. It doesn't have to be pretty. It can be very minimal, just like this. And just keep all that information that you need in one place. Maybe also write down email addresses, just in case, though I find it more useful to record email addresses either in my email address book or on my phone, just because then I'm not having to look at a page and make sure I type the email address correctly every single time. So that's a little bit of advice there. Some other things to keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, extracurriculars. So with the extracurriculars, what I suggest is, again, keep it simple. Write down what your activity is. Write down when it meets, what actions that you need to be taking either during the meeting time or between different meeting times, and write down any events you have. So For example, let's say you're involved in the orchestra. Well, you want to write orchestra. Your meeting times are whatever your practices and rehearsals are. Actions could be practicing, making reads, tuning your instrument, regular maintenance and care, keeping track of your sheet music, making copies of sheet music. And then events would be things like concerts or master classes that you register for. So that's an example. You could also be in a dance company or just some form of club. You want to keep track of all of that information. Keep it simple. And this is just an idea of where to start. All right, so 2 more things that I mentioned. First one, absence tracker. And pretty much only thing you need to keep track of in terms of an absence tracker: what day you were absent, why were you absent, and what did you miss. So this way you can learn what you need to catch up on. You know whether or not if your absence is excused. And just keep on top of your work, which I know is really hard to do when things happen. Family emergencies happen, friend emergencies happen, own personal health emergencies happen. Even just life emergencies happen. There's a lot that can go on that could take you away from your studies, and I encourage you to try to keep on top of whatever it is that you do miss. And so having a spread like this will be very beneficial for keeping track of things like that. All right, as a final suggestion of a spread you can include, and I haven't redrawn anything here because it's going to look very similar to the schedule page, other than not including the holiday. And what I suggest that you create is a work, study, play plan. And what I mean by that is redo your schedule, include more blocks of time. When do you wake up? Start there. When do you go to sleep? End there. Like, have it include all of that. And I also suggest you do not make your work, study, play plan until at least 2 weeks of term are done, or if you have turned in a homework for every single class, because that will give you an idea of how much time doing homework for a given class takes. And so what the work, study, play plan includes is it should list your class schedule. It should also include any times where you want to be working on a specific class's work. And finally, write in breaks for yourself. It is so important that you take time to make a break from your work and let your brain reset. I was never very good at taking breaks while I was in high school and undergrad. And so it stressed me out a lot, to be perfectly honest. And instead of being able to work a little bit, take a little break, instead I'd work a lot to the point where I was burning myself out. And then I'd binge all my break time. And at the end of the day, that wasn't useful to me as a student. So go ahead, schedule yourself a little bit of a break every day. Schedule time where you just sit and hang out with your friends. Like, take that time. Also, include the weekends on this work, study, play plan, and not just the 5 days of the week. Because as a student, our work, it doesn't just last 5 days, it lasts all 7. And find time that you can take a break for yourself. It is so important. And I cannot stress that enough. But again, wait a little bit into term before you construct that. Yeah. So that is all I have for you all today. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos, go ahead and click the subscribe button below. Also, if you have any questions about any of the spreads that I showed you today, please go ahead, leave them in a comment. I'm perfectly happy to answer them. Or if you have any other questions in general or something that I didn't cover, mention it to me. I'd be happy to go back and cover it. The next video that I have planned for this series is talking about daily versus weekly planning. So as I mentioned before, all these spreads that I talked about today, they're very overarching and things that you'll find useful across the whole term. However, there's obviously more to a term than just the big picture. You do have to break it down into the day by day. And so that's what I'll be talking about next week. But again, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you all next time. In the meantime, take care and have a wonderful, wonderful week. Bye.